Thanks everybody for joining the Sharding Working Group. Just start running down the agenda topics here. So today, immediately after this meeting, we have the tenant sharding proposal overview. Looking for some outcomes here. We've been talking about namespace versus tenant sharding for a couple weeks, so hopefully we'll get some clarity on which direction we should take, and we can start getting some ideas on the next steps there. If it's not clear what the outcome or what the direction should be from that meeting, then perhaps we can set a date for a decision and start moving forward in one direction or another, or I'm sure it's entirely possible a different direction could come out of those conversations. As far as timelines for partitioning events, you can read it all there. So in this milestone, we're looking to finish up the table and migration implementation. Migration process should start and possibly finish during this milestone, but more likely we're going to test and measure performance in production, and we've got an issue out there to start defining what UI changes would need to take place to make sure that we are steering users into the optimal path for the time partitioning key. So any questions on timeline? All right, we'll take that as a no. Following the standard format here, so what's been done last week, Jose and infrastructure team and Alvaro added some more comments about concerns about namespace and foreign data wrapper approach, namespace sharding with the foreign data wrapper approach. Again, to reiterate, I don't think anybody's in support right now of namespace sharding using foreign data wrappers, and the reasons are explained within that doc. So if anybody has any comments or questions, please feel free to add it to the doc. In related work, I don't think we need to run through the individual.
Well, I would particularly say that in general, I'm not 100% sure if namespace is the right key for partitioning, because that's something I haven't had time to look at myself. But I'm in general in favor of the option of sharding using foreign data wrappers, which is mostly sharding in general, plus for a particular subset of the queries using foreign data wrappers as a pattern for it. I think it's a good solution and may work here. And that's why I left those comments in the document there.
Right, and if I remember correctly, the pattern that you were talking about had foreign data wrappers, but also had an application tier that was doing some query optimization, right? So the application would know where to route those queries instead of native foreign data wrapper sharding within Postgres.
Yeah. So the idea is application assisted sharding. It's not really query execution. It's just query, that the application is aware of whether a given query requires to touch one shard or more than one, and if it's only one, directly to the shard, and you avoid going through any foreign data wrapper and avoiding any performance hit by that. And only if it needs to touch several shards, you throw it to the coordinator, which is a foreign data wrapper. If that percentage is small, the impact of foreign data wrappers limitations as of today may be small enough for this to be a worthwhile solution.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and I was hoping Jerry would actually be here for this conversation too. As you can see, he's proposing we adopt some scalability best practices and made a comment that he is not in favor of sharding at this stage, indicating namespace sharding is not workable and tenant is too invasive. He did indicate, oh, there's Jerry. Hey, Jerry, sorry. Yeah. Yep. Jerry, you want to verbalize?
Sure. So in reading all the stuff that we've been doing about sharding, I personally had a hard time just sort of structuring my thoughts around this. So I reached out to some folks that are sort of mentors to me to talk about it and talk about their experiences. And so that MR really is kind of a summary of the notes of their experience. These are folks that have done significant amount of scalability for their respective companies. We're part of a technical group, and they asked that I don't use their names, but I'm happy to share who they were off the record. So I wasn't trying to say this is the way we're going to do sharding, but sort of what their experience has yielded and sort of looking for best practices to evaluate different solutions. So that's why I put that MR in there. And then I tried to do some sort of an analysis of some of the current options just following that logic.
Okay. So yeah, encourage folks to read it. I read through it once this morning. I need to go through it again and kind of absorb it a little better. But my question, you put in there, Jerry, that you are strongly not in favor of sharding at this stage. And sharding has been and probably will be an overloaded term for a while. So can you clarify what you mean by sharding?
So what I mean by that is, and again, this is kind of the conclusion after speaking with these folks. Okay, let me push my microphone back. Does that sound better? If
That's
not,
better.
I'll
Thanks,
switch.
Gary. Thanks.
Okay. So we now have analysis that Jose did on where the saturation wall is, and we don't know exactly where it is, but at the current growth, we know that is further than 12 months. One of the strongest recommendations that I got is make sure your database is clean, as in, is there data that you can take out of the database? And we know we do, and we've been doing some of that. The disk migration is one good example of lots of data that we're extracting from the database and putting somewhere else. So that will probably extend that runway. And I'm just making the assumption that it's probably going to be 18 months. Jose is going to continue to refine the saturation analysis from the database. He's now adopting Andrew's methodology to sort of homogenize how we look at services. So that means that we have something like 6 quarters before we actually face this. And I guess my point is we don't have to rush to shard right now. If we want to set a clock of, it would take us, I don't know, 9 months to get some sharding out the door. We still have a lot of time to explore options and to see if this sort of best practices make any sense, and see if they help us, for instance, try to determine whether a different approach to sharding makes sense or not. So that's sort of where I was going with that. Yes, we will need sharding or some form of scalability. The other point to that is that we're not gonna do this and then stop for another 2 years. Scalability is gonna become something that is just going to be with us forever. Because as time progresses, we'll find that stresses in the system continue to move. And GitLab.com, for all intents and purposes, it's an entity that's alive, and it's gonna grow in ways that we can't predict. So that's also part of the reason why that MR is titled Scalability Practice, because I think we just need to ingrain some of these best practices in how we approach problems to, you know, at least have some guidance on what we do. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Does that mean, Gerir, that you're in favor of stopping the work on the audit events sharding?
I don't know the details, but I think that's more on the lines of partitioning.
It is on partitioning, yep.
Yeah, that's transparent to the application for the most part, right? We're doing that at the Postgres level. So I would bundle that one in the data tidiness or database tidiness effort more than the sharding.
Okay, so we're using sharding and partitioning differently. I'd be super in favor of a lexicon where we define stuff, because people are just throwing everything around all the time.
I have to add a section on terminology to those best practices, because as I've been talking to people about that, run into the same thing. So yes, I agree. I'll work on that and add it to that amount.
Cool, that'd be great. Partitioning, sharding, foreign data wrappers, sharding native to Postgres and everything else. Cool. So we're doing partitioning. We're not doing sharding for now because it's uncommon in the industry, and we only have to do it when we start needing it. I'm super in favor of that.
I would also agree from a database development perspective. I think there is a lot of potential in improving the database side outside of sharding, and I think we should sort of harvest those low-hanging fruits before we consider the more complex solutions. And partitioning, that is in the tool belt. I think this is a common practice for that size of a database, and there are other tools in the belt as well that we should leverage. And sometimes it's as easy as thinking about like data retention strategies. How long do we keep data to limit growth, and perhaps even fixing anti-patterns that we already know of. where I think database sharding wouldn't even help addressing those. So we can't do that. We can't continue doing those anyways. So yeah, there's a lot of potential there.
Yeah, one of the expressions that one of these people that I spoke with was garbage in, garbage out. So if you're feeding, you know, a lot of extra weight into this sort of scalability approaches, that's going to have a ripple effect, right? So if you're trying to federate these monster tables that actually have a lot of extra craft in them, then we're paying that price, right? So I totally agree that I think the short-term focus, I mean, I started putting an epic together that talks about this, and I think that section is sort of about paying our data technical debt, right? Let's do an effort to really streamline the database, because that's sharding or scaling. I'm just going to use a generic term. Scaling using these other techniques like sharding or creating components. It really is. It's easier if the data is lean.
And in that sense, we're in a fortunate position that we know we have some headroom. We know we have a lot of potential on the product to improve the database side, and we even have ways to scale up. So yeah, doing that first makes a lot of sense, I think.
Yeah.
If I can.
Sorry, Alvaro. Go ahead.
Thank you. No, I just wanted to say that if I can give my opinion, I'm a bit of an outsider anyway here, but I totally agree with scaling the database and cleaning it up and partitioning and leverage all the techniques we can do, because those are quick wins or quicker wins, and that will give more headroom. So I'm totally in favor of that. But if I would have unlimited capabilities of what I would do in my case, I would also go for exploring or continue exploring sharding alternatives in parallel to that, if that's possible at all. Because if we have now a wall in 12 months, let's say it's 18, and let's say we even buy more time with this scalability measures, and it's 24 months. Any sharding solution or sharding equivalent solution is going to take, let's say, 12 months, 18 months to be developed and ready for production usage. So that's pretty much, if we start now, we'll be on time. If we start later, maybe not that much. And at some point, I believe that sharding is going to be required, especially if there's 10x or superior aims for scalability for the database in general. Plus also the fact that, and even though scaling doesn't totally solve it, but still a single cluster is, logically speaking, a single point of failure. If the cluster is down, the whole application is down. If there are several clusters, maybe only part of the applications, maybe only part of the users are down, which comes with its own caveats and so on. But if it's possible, my recommendation, just from a technical perspective, would be to pursue both in parallel.
I agree with that. That's actually the big downside to partitioning, especially if there's no isolation in the application side from partitioning, is that instead of a single failure point, like you said, you now have multiple failure points that can take the whole site down.
So one item that I do want to highlight, especially in the context of these last 2 points. So we've been very focused on database sharding, and we're talking about it as a way to essentially do some isolation to prevent failures from affecting everyone. But that is actually the entire stack. So there are other aspects of our stack that will have the same effect. So either we take a sort of a comprehensive approach to, and this is one of the items that we talk about in the best practices in terms of creating swim lanes. So we can do all the sharding in the world on the database, and then Redis hits a wall, and oh well. So,
but that's off topic to the.
I understand. I'm just saying that we need to contextualize these conversations. So yes, we should shard the database. Yes, we should do isolation, but we should also, we don't have infinite amounts of people and time and resources and cash and all that. So picking our targets carefully, I think, is important. I'm not saying stop all work on sharding right now. I'm just saying we have a lot of time. We know how much time we have. We now have data that backs that time estimate. So we shouldn't rush, we shouldn't be having this conversation 6 months from now. But we shouldn't just say, no, let's do this because, my God, you know, the wall is there. The wall is far away, and it's being managed. And now we have data to back that up.
And this is also an opportunity to recognize that what we previously discussed, database sharding, this is very complex compared to other solutions. And with the more headroom that we have, I think it's good to reevaluate, like Jerry said, looking at the bigger picture and not only looking at the database, because I think we can't just assume that we're going to find a solution in the database that fixes all our scalability problems. So in that sense, perhaps it's time also to talk a bit more about the problems that we want to solve here, right?
Yeah, and to kind of, Gerir, I hope I'm helping you and not derailing the conversation, but there's more things to look at. Maybe we need failover between regions. Like if the Google Cloud region goes down, you can have all the sharding you want, but we're still host.
Right.
Maybe we need to focus on having multiple big instances of GitLab. So not necessarily sharding GitLab.com, but GitLab.eu, GitLab.cn, GitLab Federal, and making sure all of that is automated so that we don't need 5 new teams of people. So making sure everything runs on Kubernetes, everything works through the operator pattern, and making sure that things are resilient through that. And so there's lots of things, and we have a limited amount of people. We can pick only a few.
So this is partly why in the best practices for scalability, there's a small section that I need to expand on called swim lanes. So, there are all these swim lanes where we need to sort of map the application and figure out where is the right place where we're going to do some of the things, for instance, that you're talking about. And that's actually something that I do mention in there, that maybe customers in Germany, we must store their data in Germany. So it's not an all or nothing. It's just time is definitely a variable. And so picking where we're going to do these things is important. So that's part of what I'm saying. Yes, we're focused on database sharding. That's what we're talking about in this meeting. But it's really, I think we need to do this sort of swim lane approach to essentially decide which aspects are we going to separate and which we're not.
Okay, I want to make sure we get through all the items here. So Chun, you want to verbalize your question?
Basically, it was just discussed, I think, but I want to clarify if we are still going to continue this discussion to explore the best approach. But you had another item down there, so probably related. What are we going to do with this discussion or this thread?
Yeah. So I was actually going to propose this next week, but that's all right. Accelerated timeline. So what I was thinking was based on the conversation today with tenant sharding, but now that Jerry has brought up his suggestion and proposal, I don't think that what we're working on now really falls under the working group umbrella. And please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. With the wall, the proverbial wall, we've discovered that we're at least 12 months out, if not more. So we have time to research the best path forward. So does it make sense to either close this working group or change the focus to scalability roadmap instead, since we are not singularly focused on sharding anymore?
Makes sense to me.
So continue this while we're still kind of, I guess, focusing on what we're going to do next, or do we just close this and go asynchronous with the discussions about the scalability roadmap?
I don't see us having a, for GitLab.cn, it's not yet, oh, just install this thing on a Kubernetes cluster and you're done. So I think there's some work to be done, and maybe I should be a bit more helpful in guiding that. Gerir?
I was going to say that this whole concept of swim lanes, it's super useful. So I can work on expanding that section so folks can consume it and then see if it makes sense to use them to guide how we progress through this going forward. It's very helpful to structure these conversations based on the examples that I've seen. It really is super helpful.
So you're in favor of calling it, renaming it to the Scaling Work Group?
Sure.
Okay. I will take that on. So we're calling it the Scaling Working Group.
This is a mutating working group.
Let's call it not a mutant working group.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
but it means we're learning, and this is good. This is
absolutely
really
good. Okay. I'll take care of that this week prior to next meeting. All right, Ben, you're up.
Yeah, the data cleanliness thing that Jerry said is quite a good one. One random thing I ran into in the last couple of weeks was looking at the markdown cache. I have no idea how big this is as an item, but it's definitely something that is a random result of this kind of thinking.
Yep, MR diffs, stuff like this. Let's start knocking those out.
Cool. All right. That is all that we have on the agenda. Yes, I got your note. I will stop screen sharing during this meeting.
Yeah, you already did. Thanks for that.
Yep.
And as for the charter for the Scaling Work Group, I think there's two things that are super important. First of all, make sure that we have visibility in every single component. Like make sure that we know 12 months out the database is going to scale. Super important. Make sure we increase the resiliency. So regional failover for the cloud provider would be an example. And then third, kind of reduce the operational burden of running a forge. If we can make it more affordable to run different instances of GitLab, that would really help with GitLab China, GitLab Europe, GitLab Federal. For people's context, like China is going to be the world's biggest market soon, so really help if GitLab SaaS was big there. GitLab Europe is becoming its own data space. People want hosting there. They want it completely within European soil, including like the entrance, the on-road to it, maybe in the future, even administrators. And GitLab Federal would be a giant opportunity to increase the usage in the federal government of the US. So these are big revenue opportunities, and right now they're constrained because we know how expensive it is to run GitLab.com. So if we can put that operational experience into code and replicate it, that'd be an enormous lever for the business.
Okay. What I think I'll do then is just close the Sharding Working Group so that we keep all of because I have a timeline of things that we discussed intact on that one, and just open a new one for the Scaling Working Group so we have the history there.
Cool. I think a working group closing is a moment to be celebrated. It's good. That's the whole idea of a working group, that it's temporarily. So while it feels weird closing something out, but I think it's a great thing.
No, this was, I think, a very well-informed decision based on the data. And while it wasn't a straight journey, it was certainly an interesting one. So I think this one will be interesting too. All right, we are pretty much at time if there's nothing else. See probably a lot of you in the next meeting.